Makes sense, but it's heavy. I mean, that's what it is, you
Yeah, I
know?
mean, the reality of it is that if you don't, the Reagan speak softly, carry a big stick. I think he was I would say pretty wise in terms of his foreign policy. He wasn't a perfect president. He certainly made mistakes, but looking back on it, a lot of it is because of the challenge, the sexiness of special operations. I read a popular mechanics article when I was in high school that really introduced me to the SEAL teams. I didn't really know of them other than seeing the movie with Charlie Sheen, and that really kind of laid out from soup to nuts what they were all about, and really supercharged my desire to want to do it. But as I spent all the time that I did in the military, I learned very quickly that while special operations does some pretty high level missions and it's kind of that tip of the spear thing, the reality of it is that everybody's job in the military is equally as important because you remove any one of them and those guys can't do their job.
Hmm.
So it gave me I think an even bigger appreciation for the entire military machine and what it's capable of, how important it is, and not to get too far into politics quite yet, but uh, just how important I think it is that our elected officials be diligent or use their due diligence before sending us anywhere to ensure that it's kind of a last ditch effort, or there's no other option, because it's a big commitment.
100%. And actually, that's something I would really like to ask you about, though. You're hitting on a topic that we're all thinking about, with these multiple wars
Yeah,
now happening around the world, and it's like we are technically not sending boots on the ground, right? We're not.
yeah,
We haven't deployed the military, but we're funding both of these wars. It's war. I
yeah,
mean, you know what it is. It's horrible. It
yeah,
should be a last resort kind of thing, but it's brought up these two crowds that are obviously arguing with each other on all the time, and one crowd is kind of, I guess, tacitly supporting military industrial complex, if you will, and the other crowd is isolationist.
yeah,
And like when I study history, as best I can tell, it's kind of somewhere in between is where it's supposed to be, more towards what you just said, which is it is a necessary thing, but it should be a last resort and we should try to avoid it or de-escalate situations. And I feel like we're now at a point where people are either like war hungry or nothing.
yeah.
America's got to stay away from everything and not lead in the world at all. Like how do you have that conversation as a veteran with people usually like me who are
Yeah.
arguing about this who never served?
I mean, for me, I don't take the approach that my opinion is more valuable or worthwhile than anybody else's. I think, if you pay taxes in this country and you're an American citizen, your voice is just as important as anybody else's. And I do dislike to see some in the veteran community kind of taking that,
Mm.
self entitled approach to like, I served and you didn't, so shut the fuck up. I don't think that that's helpful. But having said that, I think, like with most things in life, balance is the key to everything. And to your point, and I agree completely, is that I'm not an isolationist, but I'm also certainly not a war hawk either. I think, if you look at historically, just within the right and left flank of the United States in terms of its history, World War II is as good of an example as to when you get involved and why, how to conduct the actual operation itself from start to finish. And then I think at least as important, maybe even more importantly, is what you do afterwards. It needs to be done in a certain intentional manner so
What do
that,
you mean by that?
well, if you look at Afghanistan and Iraq now, we spent way more time and money in both of those places than we did during World War II.
Mm.
If you look at what we did in Japan and Germany after World War II versus, and look at how Germany and Japan are now as nations in terms
Hmm.
of allies, in terms of productivity, in terms of a lack of terrorism or whatever the thing is that we battled, whatever you want to call Nazism and the imperial army in Japan. Neither of those are a threat anymore. We're allied with them. They're productive democracies because we made a commitment both during of saying we're all going to go over there, we're taking the fucking gloves off, the entire country's behind it, and we're not coming home until the mission is done. And then even when it is done, we're going to leave as many people as we need to leave there for as long as we need to leave them so that this shit doesn't happen again and it gets completely rooted out, which it did.
Yeah.
When you look at Afghanistan and Iraq, neither of those are the case, and we were there way longer, So, again, I don't think not doing anything is the right answer. It is tough with the amount of places that exist in the world to decide which ones to get involved with, and that's never an easy solution. But I do think oftentimes some of the world's most complex problems, whether it's geopolitical, socioeconomically, what have you, actually require some of the simplest solutions. And I would equate it to a bar fight, whether it's the micro of a bar fight or the macro of a world war, is that the principles are generally the exact same, in that if you're walking by and you see a bar fight taking place, you can walk in there and get involved, or you can keep walking. Why you decide to walk in there and get involved is going to vary in every instance, but understand that if you do, no matter how you conduct yourself in there, you're going to make friends and you're going to make enemies, no matter what your intentions are.
Yes.
No matter who you help, no matter who you try to hurt, you're creating that ripple effect, that the CIA studied and talked about at length in terms of the Russian involvement in Afghanistan in the 80s. And so understanding that, only walk in there if you feel like by not doing it, you're basically either creating or allowing an existential threat to your own safety, or something so egregious is happening that you can't live with yourself without walking in there and getting involved. To me, it's kind of that simple. But now if I'm going to walk in there, like, no matter what's going on, if I decide that the stakes are so high that I have to walk in there, I can tell you right now, there's going to be zero rules as to how I conduct myself in there. And if I go in there, I'm going to stack the deck at every turn to my advantage. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to use weapons. I'm going to use the element of surprise, overwhelming force, a broken bottle, a chair, a gun, a machete. I don't care. I'm not going to give them the heads up. I'm not going to give them any chance to fight fair. And I'm going to overwhelm them and absolutely wipe them off the map. And then I'm going to leave. And to me, you really have to do that. No different than, say, the Tecumseh Sherman approach in the Civil War of that scorched earth. Like, I'm going to make it so god awful. Like, we're not going to get involved unless we have to. But if we do have to, we're going to send the entire brunt of the United States military over there with absolutely everything we have. And we're going to completely demolish that entire part of the world and make them regret that they fucked with us. And we're going to make every other country that's thinking about it decide, you know what, we're not going to fuck with those guys, because I don't want that happening here. I think that's the only way you can do it.
Wow, that's makes sense, but it's heavy. I mean, that's what it is.
Yeah, I mean, the reality of it is that if you don't, the Reagan speak softly, carry a big stick. I think, he was, I would say, pretty wise in terms of his foreign policy. He wasn't a perfect president. He certainly made mistakes, but in most cases with and I'll leave the drug war out of it because I think that was a big misstep on his part. Yeah. But in terms of his foreign policy, militarily, terrorist, et cetera, I think he did a bordering on masterful job at handling our foreign policy and making people understand that we're not going to fuck with you, but if you fuck with us to a certain point, like, it's game over and you're going to absolutely regret having done so. But
yeah, I think when you look at the fact that he's the guy who essentially de-escalated the Cold War, results matter, and that's
sure.
Certainly, like, when you look at his style following up Jimmy Carter, who that was not his strength.
Yeah.
The ultimate symbolism of getting in there, like when the Iran hostages were still hostages, Reagan gets in there. Yeah. They're not hostages anymore. There's something to be said for that.
Yeah,
for sure. But it's kind of crazy. I had been studying, like, some of the build up to World War II recently, and one of the things I never knew was that we had massive isolationism thoughts in this country prior to Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
And it makes me think about it, and I hate this idea. I want to be clear about that. But, like, you look at the Afghanistan-Iraq wars, they happen after 9/11, right? You look at World War II, our involvement happens after Pearl Harbor. It's like it takes this great tragedy of being attacked on your own turf, yeah, and thousands of people dying, and I mean, they're dying, but in the worst way too, for us to be like, okay, all right, this is a problem. That said, there's also differences too, and I'm sure we'll get into it today. Like, I look at Afghanistan and Iraq differently, not our soldiers who fought there, but just the politicians
For sure.
and how they made decisions there. And you bring up the Afghanistan point. That was so sad to watch, as a civilian 20 years later, where it's basically like the fall of Saigon all over again, and the Taliban's back in control when it feels like we kind of took our eye off the ball when we started Afghanistan so strong
Yeah.
after 9/11, and then decided, all right, we're not going to put resources there anymore. Like, is it that simple, or is there a lot more to it?
I think it's largely that simple. What I would say, and having a show myself, I've interviewed a lot of Afghanistan vets and Iraq vets, and one thing that I've asked just about every single one of them was that before you went on deployment, and this is, the sled dog E4 all the way up to colonels and everything in between, is that did any of your leadership sit you down and explain to you why you're going there, what your goals on a micro level of that deployment are? But further is that this is the piece of the puzzle that you guys are inserting into the big picture that's going to get us to this goal, and it's tangible and it's well defined and it's clearly communicated. In every single fucking case, the answer is not at all.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, you have a goal when you start a podcast. If you start a business, it's okay, I'm at point A. This is what point B looks like. I know what point B is, right? I know what I want. I know where that is. There are tangible goals that I can clearly identify and explain to somebody. To me, what we went into Afghanistan with was the mentality of somebody saying, to put a business analogy to it, is that I want to be rich. It's like, what does that mean? Well, I don't know. I want to have a lot of fucking money. It's like you're not going to have any if that's your definition of what your goal is. What do we want to do in Afghanistan? We want to fucking kick the Taliban's ass, pay back for 9/11. We want to win. Okay, well, what does that look like? Well, I don't know. Fucking payback. And that was basically our strategy. And so we had no real clear definition of what winning even looks like. So if you don't know what that is, just like if you can't define what your enemy is, you're not going to defeat it. Same token, if you don't clearly define what your goal is, what achieving success actually looks like, how are you going to do it? You're not, and so, that's Afghanistan. Iraq, agreed, is a totally different animal. I think it was a complete mistake, in my opinion, having been there and lost a number of friends there and been in dangerous situations myself there. Our view and the lens with which we look at our combat experiences is very different than that macro view of what the government is deciding and what the country is behind or not. For us, it's pretty simple, is that, I volunteered to give my life if necessary, to the best of, and to serve to the best of my ability in a capacity with which my country sees the most appropriate. It's not my decision to decide whether or not they're right or not. Like I'm by volunteering, I'm putting that level of trust in our society's ability to elect people who are going to make that decision with wisdom and some caution. And so that's really all you're focused on. You're there to do the job. You're looking at the small details of ensuring that I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, and that the guy on either side of me, that we're all coming home. And that's kind of really only your priority. If you're trying to decide whether or not what you're doing there is right or not, you're probably going to be distracted, and it's not going to pan out well. So that's not really the time to think of it. As I've gotten older and reflected on that time now, I wasn't in the war room with Bush and Condoleezza Rice and everybody else to really know what that intelligence said in terms of weapons of mass destruction and whether or not there was proof that he had them at whatever level. Obviously, he used gas on his own people, and that would check that box of weapons of mass destruction. So he clearly had them to some level and was willing to use them. But especially when you look at the dynamic of the Middle East and the role that Saddam played in that region, especially with respect to Iran and keeping them in check, I think we completely stepped on our dick by getting rid of him. And now that's why Iran has gotten to where it's gotten. So not to mention the fact that they were a huge part of the IEDs and the advancement of some of the IED technology with the some of the shape charges and some of their, from a technological standpoint, some of their ability to to get through MRAPs and have some pretty gnarly IEDs that were very advanced and were coming over from Iran. So they were our biggest problem really in Iraq. So, but we kind of started it, not kind of, we created them as a monster not being in check. Now, Saddam was a prick. He was horrible to his people, but you could say that about a lot of fucking places,
Yeah.
Chinese president, the Russian president,
Yep.
a dozen of them in sub-Saharan Africa that slaughter their own people that we don't do a fucking single thing about.
Yep.
So, to me, that's not enough of a reason to go in there. And the justification of, we think there's a link to 9/11. He has WMDs. I don't buy it. I mean, Pakistan, India, they have WMDs. They have factions of their government that fucking hate us and would love to use them on us. We don't go in there and get rid of them, So to me, it just doesn't really line up. And I think it was a big mistake. But to your point about, things leading up to certain events and it taking a catastrophe, one thing I do think in looking at the World War II historical perspective of it is that there's another component that I think gets glossed over often, which is the Great Depression, the 10 years prior to it, is that my personal view is that the isolationism had more to do with that and not so much a conscious decision of we want to stay out of it, is that things are so fucking terrible here that like we don't have the bandwidth. Just like in the Philippines, they don't really give a fuck what's going on in Afghanistan because, they're just trying to fucking survive, or Indonesia or, wherever. So I think that played a bigger role in us kind of burying our heads in the sand. It was kind of out of necessity, but it still ended up catching up to us.
Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.